so much for being here for my lecture with the European Graduate School. It's very exciting for me to be involved in this. So thank you to Nemanja and Chris for inviting me and others. I have a slide that I would like to, slide deck that I would like to share to start, if that's okay.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So I think we'll do also just questions at the end, but as advertised, my lecture today is called Big Tech's Claims from Social Media to Crypto. And in the background of this slide is actually another slide from 2012 from Brian Chesky, one of the co-founders of Airbnb, where he claims that access is more powerful than ownership, which is one of the early things that I saw when looking as an artist at technical claiming things, which put me on my path to a number of projects that I'm going to go through today. This is the claim of the European Graduate School that I will do this talk. This blurb is also quite interesting. I will go through all of these things, but I will also put this through a lens of artistic practice and research as well, as I am an artist, not an academic per se, or a writer or something like that. So I will go through looking at these claims through different lenses. So the talk will be more like a guided tour through my research projects and artistic interventions for the last 10 years, roughly, 2011 to now, 2021, so a decade of tech. And I think that decade in tech claims can be kind of bracketed maybe by two documents here. One, Why is Software Eating the World by Mark Andreessen, which was a very influential post that he put on Wall Street Journal. Actually, it's not a post, it was an article he wrote. And then this recently, I think, released book by Adrian Jaub, more like critiquing the claims of tech. So I thought I'd bracket my activity within these two documents as Software Eats the World. Mark Andreessen, of course, for those who don't know, he was the co-founder of Netscape and now is a very, very influential venture capitalist, funding many influential companies. So I'm going to start with a project that I made from 2011-12 onwards and presented in 13 called All You Need Is ... data. This is an image of a prominent tech conference, journalism conference that happens in Munich every year, run by the Burda organization, publishing company in Germany. And All You Need Is Data was the name of their 2012 conference. A number of people were speaking then. They every year invite, like many prominent tech conferences, invite people to come and speak who are very well known in the tech industry. This is a picture of the founder of Dropbox speaking to a journalist with the All You Need Is Data background. I was totally fascinated as an artist by this when some of my friends were invited to come speak. So the curator Hans-Ulrich Obrist programs an arts panel every year and has done since the mid-2000s in this. So it's one of the rare opportunities that artists, young artists, get to be face-to-face with real tech entrepreneurs. And it's a very interesting meeting of worlds. And I was totally fascinated when some friends of mine went that year. And in that year, many people were speaking, and it's been very interesting to look back from this point in tech evolution to that moment. So this is a look at what the stage looked like. It was very well presented, kind of crazy design they used for the stage, but also had many really interesting speakers in retrospect now too. This is one Chris Poole, who was the founder of 4chan, and I think back in 2011, 4chan was not as well known as it is today, because it was the place where kind of Pepe the Frog and the alt-right emerged. But at that point, it was a bit less known. But Chris Poole was talking on that DLD about privacy. And I was thinking about how to process this as an artist. So I kind of, got permission from them and went through the recordings of that group of sessions. And I was thinking about design. I was thinking about how to process this in dialogue with the type of work that I was interested in making, which is installation art. And I was thinking about this type of design, which was the current iOS system, which also I think looks a bit outdated now. So that was, I think, iOS 5. And so I was thinking, okay, I need to take the logic of what is going on at the most extreme ends of this design convention and kind of apply it to the content of what's happening in that in that space. And in case you have not come across this term before, the kind of primary design paradigm of that era was skeuomorphism, which was an interactive, a kind of infographic style where real objects or depictions of real objects stand in for functions. So it's supposed to be a shorthand to tell people who are not used to using a kind of graphic interface how to use it by depicting the object that is kind of near to it. And obviously Apple's design was very clear in that direction. And I thought to take that in the direction also of making canvases. So I kind of pulled out all of the parts of skeuomorphic design that I could, and also selected a quote from every talk in the 100 talks that was happening over 3 days at the DLD summit. And again, looking back now on what was happening then, I think you get a very different sense of where tech was thinking of itself at the time. So Chris Poole may be saying, you cannot have radical freedom, real freedom of speech without being able to be anonymous. The concept of what privacy has changed, but no, I don't think it's dead yet. You talk to regulators and they don't get it. For them, data is something scary, something that people need protection from. And we left a lot up to Mark Zuckerberg, and a lot of it didn't go so well. People don't understand that data is the oil of the 21st century. So interesting to think of how these people were speaking in 2012. And you can see I kind of made a screen similar to the iPhone screen with a kind of dot down the bottom as the stage, and all these elements kind of transformed into sort of 3D skeuomorphic representations. Other people speaking then, Jack Dorsey. I believe that information helps the world. I think that services like Twitter make possible a more direct democracy based on immediate feedback. Very interesting claim from the perspective of today with regards to, for example, Trump. Yeah, another really interesting one. He was claiming at that point, I'm a believer that if you give people information, if you give them a rich data, then allow them to make good decisions, they will make good decisions because they can potentially see all angles. And again, from a design perspective, I was trying to do this also in the most extreme iOS 5 version that I could. So I used the handwriting font from the Notepad app. I use, all of these pins and stickies and whatnot. Also, what had just happened then, if you remember, even people working for government were claiming that tech was really helping spread democracy at the time. So this is a really interesting panel between people thinking about more policy. So this guy, Alex Ross, who was at that point the senior advisor for Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State under Obama, was saying after the overthrow of Ben Ali in Tunisia, a banner hung quite close to the French embassy that simply read, "Thank you, Facebook." This does test the traditional boundaries between private and government. Open source politics is throwing open the doors of government and using crowdsourcing tools. to put things on the internet, to digitize, socialize, and it's been proven, privatize, open up to competition, internationalize. Digitization is internationalization. Yeah, it's a very interesting moment to think about the claims around the Arab Spring, and that was also rife at this conference. Yeah, this slide that I start with, the idea that access is more powerful than ownership, claimed Brian Chesky from Airbnb. Here's Brian's thing. He said, we used to keep up with the Joneses, and now I think we're sharing with the Joneses. People used to live in cities. This is an amazing short history he gave. After World War II, we moved out of cities and started living in suburbs, where we became disconnected. The further away we got from each other, the less we trusted people. We started staying at home and watching TV and being isolated in cars. Yeah, another claim, could nations actually war with each other if their residents live together? I don't know, but I hope it's less likely. And that we're hardwired to share. Very interesting claims on the sharing economy. Itself a title that claims a lot, I would say. Yeah, also speaking was Sheryl Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook at that point, and she was saying also some quite amazing things looking back. A lot of new rules are being written by people who don't know they're writing them. Sandberg said, and everybody now has the power of voice. Facebook is word of mouth at scale. I want to look at my news feed and read what my friends are reading because they've already done the sorting for me. Yeah, there was a lot of predictions that social media would decline because it's all trivial and silly, right? So that was where the conversation was around Facebook at that point as well. The Dyson family, very interestingly, in the second stage at DLD, amazingly in a kind of cabin. This was the founder of Groupon, Andrew Mason, who has gone on to do other things since, but I found his panel the most amazing. He said, describing the kind of atmosphere of investment and scaling at that point, to say of a company that was growing 500% year on year at that point, about to kind of crash. He said around him, people were saying, let's start having fun, let's get funky, let's announce everything, let's be wildly positive in our forecast, let's take this thing to the extreme. If we get whacked on the ride down, who gives a shit? The time to get radical is now. We have nothing to lose. And a very amazing sense of things there. This one is Tim Draper. I was going to play you a moment with Tim speaking on stage at another conference, but I think I'll move on to the installation here. So all these panels, I made a panel for every panel, and I organized them in the Kunstverein around the corner from the event the following year. So my exhibition opened a year after the show that I made, the conference I made the exhibition about, and I organized it through the Kunstverein into a kind of a chicane where everybody would have to kind of walk through this in a rigid timeline as a kind of short history of the previous year. So I managed to work with DLD to have a party inside their old, my show, which was a kind of a short history of their own work. And yeah, viewers would be able to kind of walk through this maze, this physical maze, and then end up at the end at a dead end, actually. And you would have to kind of walk back out of the Kunstverein. It took quite a lot of time. And all you could see was a kind of blank canvases behind you. So these were actually a kind of a way of, yeah, physicalizing that moment in interface design with the skeuomorphism, and also to show, yeah, a year's past in an industry which looks at history in a very particular way. That was the entranceway to it. Now, from one I guess format of looking at technology and the way technologists and business people speak about what they do to another. After organizing this installation, I thought, well, what is the kind of the most important kind of brand to engage with in terms of spreading ideas and technologists, and that is, of course, the TED conference, which actually DLD is kind of modeled off the German one that I showed you through before. At that point, Tedx conferences were just kind of getting going. They were sort of self-organized versions of the larger brand, like user-generated content versions of the larger brand. And so me and an artist friend of mine, after being invited by the Kunstmuseum Liechtenstein to do a project, we decided to do a real TED conference. And I thought Liechtenstein was a very interesting place to stage a TED conference because Liechtenstein, to me, sort of stood for a bunch of things in terms of financialization and, looking at special forms of sovereignty. And so we tried to play on those themes as well. And we got a TED license for Vaduz. And we made, TEDx Vaduz, the first one ever. Vaduz is the capital of Liechtenstein, for those who have not been there before. And we called it Radically Open, put up a website, and then invited a bunch of speakers. Now, most of those speakers were artists, and we designed a special stage set of here, which you kind of see, with Liechtenstein as a kind of tropical island, so a kind of an outside space. Here is me and my co-host and fellow artist Daniel Keller, who is now most visible on the New Models podcast. If you guys want to go and check his work out, he's also made artwork in this direction for a long time as well. Here is me and Dan standing on our special Tedx Vaduz stage in the middle of a kind of a fake ocean. And we had a number of speakers, as I say, artists and thinkers, some people from Liechtenstein and some international artists, friends of ours that sort of understood the type of, rhetoric that we were trying to engage with directly with doing a TED conference. So Emily Siegel here doing a talk, and she spoke about kind of branding and money, which I think was a really interesting talk. Emily, I'll talk about her later as well, but we were close dialogue partners at that point. She was involved in branding with Wolf Oldens and a number of other people as well. Had just founded the term normcore at that point. And Femke Herregraven, who talked about the geographies of money and the way that money moves around. And it was amazing. We thought our speakers standing on this Liechtensteinian island was pretty interesting. So I also processed that show, or the TEDx Vaduz in another way. I decided I wanted to kind of celebrate the fact that we'd been given access to this brand and sort of document some of the talks in a series of sculptures. And the first thing I did was iced the successful TEDx application onto a series of cakes, which was a kind of a sculptural gesture. So every page of them I iced onto a cake. And then I made a special kind of diagram space, sculptural space for that cake as well. And then we kind of put them in these special vitrines with quotes from the talk and kind of ways of looking at that. So you can see a sculptural cage there for this theme of the offshore world. I made an exhibition for it here. This is one in Rome, and this is one at MoMA PS1 in New York, where I did a kind of survey at that point of all of the work that I've been doing about art, social media. So this was a reconstruction of the stage, and then also a kind of display of those cakes. And it was a very special show for me. The Tedx was not the only project I showed there. Here's an image from the rest of the space at MoMA PS1 there, where I kind of presented my exhibitions all in succession. You can see the DLD slightly over the side there, as a kind of a trade fair presentation. So all of my work was kind of using the language of tech display as an exhibition language. I thought if I'm making artwork that engages with these topics, then I'm also can use the language which already exists in the world of making work and making exhibitions. So I did a trade fair of my own work. And for that, I also collaborated again with Emily. Here she is on the side with the curator, Peter Ely. We launched a product that she was working on with a tech startup at that point as a part of the opening. So here's an annotation program she was working on, a platform called Genius. We had a kind of live launch of a product of theirs. So really blurring the lines between art event, trade fair, and kind of real product launch. Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz represented, and some annotations going on top of his claims. Emily, if you guys want to know more about this period, has written an amazing kind of autofiction version of these years of her research as well, which a character that kind of resembles me weaves in and out of. It's a really great read so look up Mercury Retrograde. Thinking about notions of outside and the Tedx language, I started to research more in other directions as well around literature of exit, let's say in the technology circles. And I'd started to follow, influential thinkers on Twitter. I was reading books by major tech thinkers like Peter Thiel, and I was following various thinkers on Twitter and other platforms. And this book kept coming up again and again around a certain group of thinkers called the sovereign individual. And I think what I'd intuited with the Tedx Vedut's piece with Daniel and Emily was that this notion of internationalism and a kind of post-nation state world was a big part of the mythology that some of these thinkers were peddling. So I got really into this book. I read it all, and I kind of researched the thinkers a little bit around it as well. And all of this happened at around the same time as this document came out too, which was an application for New Zealand citizenship that floated to the top in New Zealand, where I'm from. I'm born in New Zealand, raised there, living in Germany, but I keep up with friends in New Zealand a lot, and news. Also, my art, I guess, is always made from a perspective of being from New Zealand. But this is an application for citizenship for Peter Thiel, one of the most prominent technology thinkers. He was the co-founder of PayPal, and also was the first investor in Facebook, beyond kind of early friends of Mark. So the reason I mentioned Peter in this, because a bunch of things about the sovereign individual started to come together around his work. So these are the two authors of the sovereign individual, James Dale Davidson and Lord William Rees-Mogg. Those of you who don't know Lord William Rees-Mogg, he was the editor of the Times for many years, but also was the father of Jacob Rees-Mogg. So just a little reminder of that. These guys wrote this book, and also it seemed that James Dale Davidson also had a kind of tangle up with New Zealand. Here is a Stuff article, prominent newspaper in New Zealand, called "Runaway Millionaire Saves New Zealand Run by Idiots," and also a Companies New Zealand document, which shows that James Dale Davidson actually had ownership of a kind of property around the lower North Island of New Zealand, which looked like this. At one point in 2013, around this moment when I was making work, he actually sold this property, got out of New Zealand. But the fact that these types of players had been in dialogue with New Zealand for a while, I thought kind of interested me. So what was Peter Thiel to do with all of this? I looked at some James Dale Davidson material and found that he talked about the sovereign individual with imagery like this that went along with it. So kind of castle in the sky, again, this kind of exiting nation state language. And that really reminded me a lot of the language around Lord of the Rings that was being used at the time to market New Zealand. So those of you who saw the Lord of the Rings films made by prominent New Zealand director Peter Jackson, that was being a lot used as also in marketing for New Zealand. So this is a New Zealand map of New Zealand as a Lord of the Rings space, which is a very complicated way to frame New Zealand, because New Zealand is, as you probably know, a sort of more ongoing colonial project, depending on how it's framed. So the idea of dragging and dropping an very English worldview on top of that landmass is really controversial and problematic. But anyway, they also had these New Zealand after the Lord of the Rings movies. They kept some of the sets. So these are some of the sets that you can go and visit as a kind of like Lord of the Rings theme park in New Zealand. Amazingly similar, I think, to James Dale Davidson's images as well, of this kind of space that he had. And here's a quote from Thiel as well, which I found in Davidson's own work. Apparently claiming Thiel saying, "I'm an extremely big fan of your work, which have shaped my thinking above all about markets, perhaps more than anything else." So the direct influence on Thiel I've kind of gleaned was the case. Thiel also has a number of other interests in Lord of the Rings narratives. These are two gaming cards, which spotlight Valar and Palantir, two things from Lord of the Rings, which also influenced companies that he founded. So Palantir is a company that you probably have all come across recently. They provide data visualization software to nation-state security organizations and enterprise organizations. It's really a very controversial platform because it's also seen to be biased in the way that it brings association networks together. Oh, that was a slide that I thought I took out. Actually, this is the Palantir offices or presentation at Davos in 2019, would you believe, with a little Lord of the Rings-esque game there. Anyway, this is interestingly, the co-founder of Palantir as well, which is Alex Karp, and an incredible picture that the New York Times published of them working in their offices with Michel Foucault on the wall. For those of you who are familiar with the work Foucault did around governmentality, and it's a pretty ironic image to hang on your wall. I might come back to Karp later, but so other Lord of the Rings stuff that runs through Peter Thiel's ventures, Valar Ventures. That's another firm that he founded for a venture capital firm. So these Lord of the Rings narratives run through there a lot. And other people in his universe are also very interested in other things, which I got interested in framing this project. Like this guy, Reid Hoffman, who is very famously, apparently, according to the Financial Times, a big board game fan, saying board games inspired his business strategy. And here he is playing Settlers of Catan, which is a very interesting game in the context of that. He also apparently did his own version of Settlers of Catan, which is called Startups of Silicon Valley. So I thought, aha, I found a form to work with, because Settlers is it's a pretty interesting game. It's very popular here in Germany and in other parts of the world as well. I think it was made in Germany in 1994, so it's a recent board game. But it's basically a kind of a gamified colonial settlement project. So it's very interesting in its game mechanics, but its narrative is really quite complex. And other things that I was looking at around the teal world was settlements like this outside of nation states called seasteading spaces. So you can see potentially these are kind of dreams which the Seasteading Institute gave kind of illustration to, but they look very much like the game parts of Catan to me. And here's another one. So they're literally floating nations in international waters that then claim their own national sovereignty. Now, there's nothing that exists yet in the real in this space, but Daniel Keller, the artist that I mentioned before, did a really amazing project following the Seasteading Institute to an attempt they made at founding a nation off the coast of Tahiti, again, Pacific, founding nations, projection into kind of neo-colonial projects. Yeah, these were themes I was interested in. Also, the imagery around Catan is pretty interesting because, as you can see, there are these three distinctively white people looking very pastoral in front of what is presumably a kind of terra nullius, which they've claimed. So I did my own version of this. I tried to kind of bring these strands of things together and did a founders game. And this is an oil painting I made, commissioned in order to kind of bring some of these imagery together. James Dale Davidson, Peter Thiel, Palantir, some of James Dale Davidson's imagery, things from seasteading, the moon and Mars from Elon Musk. I just thought all of these things needed to be kind of aligned in the same body of work. I printed over existing Catan boxes, and I made up my own rules as well. So exit a decaying Earth and settle, trade, and build your way to a free galaxy, one domain at a time. You can be the founder. So this kind of, yeah, as I say, kind of neo-colonial language, very appropriate. A lot of this language I lifted with a friend of mine who helped me write it, named Anthony Burt, a critic from New Zealand. We lifted a lot from Peter Thiel's own writing and from The Sovereign Individual, the book. So here you have this kind of grand founders game where you kind of start on a decaying Earth and end up going first to New Zealand, then to seasteading, and then to the moon and Mars. Yeah, these are some of the imagery that we produced for that. And we had cards along the way. You kind of build your way through some of these people. Again, Mark Andreessen pops up at Sand Hill Road, various Bitcoin mining institutions, Tesla. I did other games as well as part of that exhibition. So it wasn't only the Catan game, but I also did this game based on a kind of a more recent game where a bunch of heroic founders fight kind of things that you might want to get rid of, like democracy, escape the constraints of the nation state and establish global domination, ascend above the nation state to the global cloud where every individual is free and equal. This is again kind of translating this ideology from this book and these thinkers. So I worked with the existing characters in this game, Descent, that I based it on, and kind of layered up these portraits of people like Peter Thiel with kind of symbolic imagery that related to them. So yeah, here's a oil painting we used from that and the kind of card that describes his character. Also Vitalik Buterin, a figure that I'll describe in a later project as well, who's the founder of Ethereum, probably the most important cryptocurrency outside of Bitcoin, and a new operating system for the third web, potentially. and Balaji Srinivasan, another very influential thinker who was also espousing a lot around this idea of exiting as the nation state as a kind of a solution for political growth. He has only become more and more visible since this period. So here's some close-ups from that game. The Teal character fighting fair elections, democracy, monetary policy, and also, you know, working against with special powers of public outrage and scapegoating. Yeah, exactly. Using transparency, democracy, and fighting the bad guys of transparency, democracy, and fair elections. So, interestingly, I think my work is most fun when it engages with things beyond presentation. So like my DLD project, I had the people who were speaking the next year in there as a kind of party. I also had an interesting interaction with Teal. So he came and actually finally saw the exhibition I'd made all around this work. So he visited this tiny little gallery in Auckland, Michael Lett Gallery, where I had the exhibition. Very unexpected to me. We were not in touch at all before then. And it was quite amazing that he spoke to people there and said that he found the exhibition to be a work of phenomenal detail, and he left his details, and we had a brief exchange after that as well, which was a really gratifying experience. Yeah, but I mean, to more seriously as well, to kind of look back into this project, Mark O'Connell, who has become quite well known for a couple of books, including Notes from the Apocalypse, from an Apocalypse, which he recently released, is based on a few travels that he made exploring ideas of technology and apocalypse. And actually, Mark wrote about his experience of seeing this work in that book and in this Guardian article that I'm quoting from as well. And I think one of the best parts of that article is where it focuses on a scholar called Kylie Quince, a very prominent New Zealand Māori scholar, who said, any invocation of New Zealand as a utopia is a giant red flag, particularly to Māori like herself. That is the language of emptiness and isolation that's always used about New Zealand during colonial times. And it was always, she stressed, a narrative that erased the presence of those who were already here in her own Māori ancestors. So I think it's really important to kind of see these colonial associations. And in the presentation of this exhibition, there wasn't only those games. Because I was aware of these narratives and how they clashed with New Zealand's history, I also put these works in dialogues with other artists. This artist, Michael Parakofai, who was actually one of my first professors in New Zealand when I was learning to make art, and he kind of taught me everything I knew at a very young age about contemporary art. And this is a work that he made in the 1990s, actually, using also the language of gaming. So the giant bronze jack straws, which also speaks to the kind of language of colonialism. And when I took this project on to another venue in Christchurch in the South Island of New Zealand, I put the work in dialogue also with other artworks by Michael. So this is a self-portrait, kind of. It's not exactly a self-portrait, but it's an amazing figurative piece that he made, which is called Poor Man, Beggar Man, Thief. And there's 3 of these kind of objects. And yeah, it was amazing to kind of work with him in kind of positioning the ideology that was kind of coming via Teal, Facebook, these other kinds of things, in dialogue with other spaces in New Zealand. So this is how this show looked. Again, these objects, paintings, board games. In the background, you see more of Michael's work. This is an artwork that Michael made, again, with this kind of game-like thing based on Gordon Walters, a really amazing New Zealand painter who took Māori designs and made it into modernism, very controversial artist, but also an artist that is very accepted and embraced in New Zealand. A lot of kind of corporate design riffs off these kind of supposedly bicultural forms that he made. But Michael Patakofai made these incredible versions of those as well, questioning that appropriation. Yeah, there was also a version of me, a kind of a work which I feel pretty strange about now, actually, but it was a big part of that show, which is a kind of a version of Operation, this game also where you kind of like pick things out of a body, and I made a kind of giant version of that in dialogue with an older piece by an artist that I'm a big fan of named Tedx, who did A Death of the Hippie, and this is a kind of a version of, yeah, a death of a, I don't know, kind of an artist in the way that I'd been behaving. And we put those in dialogues also with these other pieces that I spoke about before. Also, you can see in the corner a second version of Michael's work on the floor there. So there was these kind of quite strong parallels between our artworks. And here another room. And incredibly, during this time, and tragically, there was also the most, I guess, globally visible event that Christchurch has seen in a long time while this exhibition was on. This terrorist attack on the mosque in New Zealand, in Christchurch, and yeah, it was a really sad moment for me to realize that the kind of ideology and dialogues that I was thinking about were also a part of yeah, things that were being used for this. So so in the Christchurch attackers space, which Facebook live streamed and didn't take down very controversially, there were also kind of claims that rhymed with some of the ideology that is represented in some of these artworks. So pretty awful. A piece that I think dealt with that really well after the fact is by a colleague of mine, Dr. Karamia Muller, and some friends of hers, where she put together an ongoing map, an online map, which you guys should visit, about yeah, violent legalities. So kind of a history of violence, racialized violence in New Zealand. Again, Jacinda Ardern, who is a very amazing person in many ways, claimed that it was the Christchurch shooting was unprecedented violence. And projects like Karamia's pushed back on that notion, saying that actually there'd been violence all along in New Zealand, and it was not at all unprecedented. Okay, moving on as well. Again, these kind of yeah, these gaming contexts come up again and again. There's many projects I've done that I haven't shared as well that speak to this gaming context. But another thing which has come up really recently is the rise of Bitcoin, and we're on a kind of a massive growth curve of interest in crypto at the moment again. And I made a number of projects over the last 5 years about crypto, and some of the imagery around it and some of the ideology around it, which is also very close to this the sovereign individual type narratives. Here is a magic card with a Magic the Gathering symbol, which is very close to the Ethereum logo. Again, I'll talk about that later. But worth noting that Bitcoin, the first Bitcoin exchange, was also first set up as a magic card exchange, this Mt. Gox here. So the connection between gaming and design and worldviews put through these types of games is really strong. So this was a show that I did as part of the Berlin Biennale in 2016, and we managed to get this incredible venue in Berlin. For those of you who've ever been here, this is now a business school, but it was the Staatsratsgebäude, which is the kind of Communist Party's one of their central headquarters during the communist regime. So it was, you know, communist modernism as a building put onto kind of with a Prussian facade in the middle. Yeah, it was a really significant place to hold this exhibition. And I wanted to look at how ideology around crypto, this is 2017, no, 16, was kind of growing at that point. And I wanted to focus on 3 figures and 3 companies to do that. So I first focused on Blythe Masters, who was one of the people in mainstream banking. She was one of the first people who worked a lot in securities in the early 90s, got very, very famous as a banker, and then set up a company called Digital Asset, which was looking to bring blockchain and Bitcoin stuff, technologies into mainstream banking at that point. I looked again at Balaji Srinivasan, who I spoke about before in the previous project. Here's him talking at Y Combinator about exit, exactly these things before, as a kind of representative and a kind of an evangelist for Bitcoin, and a company that he was running at the time called 21 Inc. And Vitalik Buterin, who is very, very famous now as the founder of, one of the founders of Ethereum, the kind of, yeah, I guess blockchain 2.0, where beyond Bitcoin, it's being used as a kind of an operating system and a platform for a new web service. Anyway, so I put inside the Staatsratsgebäude, which was now a business school, so a communist building that's now a capitalist engine, a kind of a fake trade fair, one for each of these companies. And I made a booth with a kind of cutout of each founder of these things and some of their rhetoric on the walls. And then at the center of that presentation, I presented them as if they were trying to sell a commemorative postage stamp for each of their systems. So I worked with a postage stamp designer to kind of make a version of a stamp, which was at that point worth exactly $1 in each of these currencies. So this was the one in dollars, using blockchain to move dollars around banks. This is Balaji's booth. When software eats the world, voice your dissent in the nationalist land below or exit to the cloud above. Bitcoin is a protocol that names a true global free market, is what he was saying. And then, yeah, he had a kind of a display as well of his kind of mining system that he was pumping at that point. And the stamp which I designed was his little mining machines over Silicon Valley. Yeah, saying machines earn and spend Bitcoin, currency as network, easily monetize data, and free as in free market. And the final one, the most radical one as well in terms of booth design, was the Ethereum platform and Vitalik. Here I actually ripped up the carpet to make this installation space. So this is literally sprayed with spray paint on the underside of the existing communist carpet. The design there with some kind of ideological precedents in the background, Pirooz Kalayeh and Ludwig von Mises, and Vitalik in the middle with this ideology around this very magic card looking design. And here you can see in the installation, again, this amazing existing communist mural that was there by an artist called Fritz Kuhn, a very prominent metal artist from the period there of communism. And again, a kind of a delivery through technology of peace kind of theme, which I thought was really amazing. Yeah, I also made sculptural board games, which kind of diagrammed these risk games. This one for capital markets conquest. This one for, yeah, the nationalist land versus the technologist cloud. And this one for Ethereum as kind of in outer space. And amazingly, I got invited to really dialogue again with the crypto world with this. And I was invited to the Ethereal Summit in 2017 in New York, where one of the, again, co-founders of Ethereum had a kind of company there. And in with a bunch of other artists in the backyard of their unit, we had a kind of giant bubble, which was a sculpture by Foam, an artist collective. And inside that, among many other artists' work, we had my giant board game. And here is Joe Lubin playing that risk game. Yeah, I've done a number of other kind of board game works based on the language of Ethereum and the kind of promise of crypto. I made game of life boards with centralized narratives versus decentralized narratives on them. Here is one which talks to an ideal decentralized post-scarcity future, a kind of the supposed utopia that comes with using crypto on the web and kind of further decentralization. I also made group exhibitions with other artists working in this space, trying to respond to decentralization as a space and trying to look at some of those claims. So again, using that amazing bubble by foam, we put an artwork by Decentralized gallery in the space. This was 2018 by now. And here is an amazing work of theirs which literally burns money for crypto. So you would put in €5 and it would flame up, as you see in this video, and then you would get issued a token. Here's another artwork, which is one of the kind of most amazing artworks made using blockchain, I think, until now, which is a part of a project called Terra Zero, where a kind of a tree and a forest pays for its own legal existence. Really amazing project there, using crypto as a platform. Interestingly, dialoguing with the emergent NFT space, which I think, again, today, for those of you who follow crypto, has kind of gained this incredible momentum recently since the Winklevoss twins have bought Nifty Gateway, and there's been hundreds of thousands sales of crypto-related art on the internet platform that they use, and other ones like Super Rare. But at the time, the biggest sale of a crypto-related artwork was Cryptokitties. And here is this bizarre auction that was done at Christie's in New York, where a CryptoKitty was taken offline into a sort of offline wallet, and then sold at auction for $140,000 to a collector. And I thought, oh wow, I'm curating in this space. I need this object. So we reached out to this guy, and I made a special display, a cardboard display, which sat again in this giant bubble, where you had a cardboard replica of the auction sale display, and then the real CryptoKitty, supposedly, which is a very strange thing because it's supposed to be an online NFT artwork. And then I did a sort of cardboard replica of it as well. So moving through this idea of where do these artworks exist? Here's the proud owner of the CryptoKitty, which I'm sure has actually only gone up in value since then. Beside the artwork, he lent it to us generously for that space. Amazingly, after that, I was invited by the Financial Times to a talk, and in a very strange location in East London, where I brought my cardboard CryptoKitty along as a part of the props on stage, and Isabella Kaminska from the Alphaville part of the Financial Times hosted. Here you see her, a number of speakers, between Adam Curtis, the filmmaker, BBC filmmaker, who's just also released a new film in the last week, I think, and a guy called Craig Wright, who claimed to be the founder of Bitcoin, Satoshi. Now, if those of you who know who Satoshi is, or any of the stories around that, it's very unclear who the founder of Bitcoin is, and on purpose, the founder of Bitcoin was supposed to be anonymous and claimed this name called Satoshi. And in this amazing piece in the London Review of Books by Andrew O'Hagan, the Satoshi affair, this guy Craig Wright is explained making a claim to it, and Craig has gone on to make his own Bitcoin company called Bitcoin SV, Bitcoin in Satoshi Vision, and which is also worth a lot of money again now. But here he is on stage, and as a kind of a congratulations, I gave him the cardboard Cryptokitty as a kind of a performance piece for the Financial Times there. Unfortunately, Craig left that behind as he left the stage. Okay, yeah. One other thing I wanted to share with you, moving through these kind of claims of big tech into another space, is a very poetic sculpture I made in response to an amazing piece of research done by these two thinkers, Kate Crawford and Vladan Jola, which you can check out on Anatomy of .ai, called Anatomy of an AI System. And they looked at what was going into making some of these giant systems run. So one of the things that crypto is often criticized for is how energy intensive it is to run its systems. But crypto is not the only thing that takes a lot of energy to run. Also, all other technology systems do as well in many, many different ways. And Kate and Vladan put together this amazing diagram which showed everything that went into making AI, an Amazon Echo speaker, smart speaker work. So that's from labor that went into hardware that was produced, from minerals in the ground. It was kind of everything in one diagram. It's a really amazing piece of work. But as a part of that, they also identified an amazing patent by Amazon, which they said, and it's a beautiful description, so I'll read it. Hidden among thousands of other publicly available patents owned by Amazon, US patent number 9 million and something, represents an extraordinary illustration of worker alienation, a stark moment in the relationship between humans and machines. It depicts a metal cage intended for the worker, equipped with different cybernetic add-ons that can be moved through a warehouse by the same motorized systems that shifts, that shifts shelves filled with merchandise. Here, the worker becomes part of a machinic ballet held upright in a cage, which dictates and constrains their movement. So I was just amazed by this, and I looked through. It was a big news splash when these guys wrote about it, and I looked at this kind of diagram. And I just thought, wow, that's like the most amazing diagram of the relationship between like art. Between workers and machines in the age of kind of cloud computing and Amazon and shipping. And so here is the diagram from the patent, through these various news sites. And just so you understand what it is, here's an image also reproduced of an Amazon like space where they keep their stock. And the idea is that this cage would, instead of on these kind of orange and yellow stacks of shelving, would sit on top of these robots and move around with a human inside them. It was a kind of a safety thing. If usually these spaces are fully automated without any humans in them when they move around. And this was an idea that if you needed to put a human in there, how would you do it? And therefore this cage. But I thought, okay, I want to see that cage in the real. And I went down to my metalwork store and said, hey, let's make this cage out of this patent drawing. So this kind of slightly weird sculpture was made in response to this drawing. And what you end up with is a sort of translation of everything that is in that drawing, including these kind of numbers that come off the cage. This bizarre, kind of translation of this very kind of poetic object. And inside, I thought, how do you engage with this language around the worker inside? So I thought, okay. Here's some other angles on it. But what could be something that speaks to labor in general and the different poignant things of labor? And I was looking at the show that I was making this for originally was in Australia, and I was looking at incredible rates of extinction in animals in Australia at the time, and the King Island brown thornbill was a bird that was cited as the most likely bird to become extinct in the whole of Australia. And I thought, what if there was a representation of the King Island brown thornbill in this cage? So I worked with a group of people at the Australian National University to kind of show, to see if I could get a recording of this bird that I could use to make a kind of a representation of this bird in this cage. So we managed to do that. Actually, they managed to do that. I don't know if you guys can hear this this bird call, but this is the bird call of the King Island brown thornbill. And here is the cage where we put a version of this using an augmented reality app. So the bird kind of flies around inside the Amazon worker cage. It's a pretty moving experience. And when many people are around it, it's amazing because you kind of get this vision of people with their iPhones kind of looking into an empty cage and a kind of chorus of bird song around. Okay. Well, I have more that I could present, but I think maybe it's a good time to perhaps end my talk and open for questions. And I'd like to end also on, I've focused on a lot of thoughts of technology thinkers in this space, but I think somebody that said one of the most poignant things about looking critically at technology speakers was a national kind of hero from New Zealand called Linda Smith. And this is an image of Linda, and the quote is worth a read. So she said, anything that you can see or read that claims to be innovative, novel, life-changing, world-changing, driven by the idea of neutral data, you just know intuitively it just can't be all of those things. You just can't claim that algorithms are neutral or that data, big data, metadata gathered from institutions that have been gathering data for years, you know, it will not have great data. It'll be flawed. It'll have erased identities. It will be inaccurate. And that's something I think a lot about when I look into this space. Okay. So, oh, Chris, hang on.
If I may jump in a moment, we had some technical difficulties. I was delayed, and so I very much regret that I got in a little bit late there. But I want to grab the occasion still to say it's wonderful to see you again, and this talk has been wonderful, and I really it's very exciting, and you can see questions appearing. I want to just pass the screen to you back in just a moment, but let me say two words that I didn't get to say by way of introduction.
Sure.
I think that you have introduced yourself quite marvelously. So this is unnecessary. But I did want to say that this talk is co-hosted by the university with which Nemanja Mitrovic is associated. So this is the Faculteit Médias et Communicaties. And we're really pleased to have them co-hosting with us on this occasion and others this year. So that's our, a word from our co-sponsors. And I did want to mention two things, and then we'll just go to your questions and answers, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Two things. One is that many people will not know. I mean, many people will know of the EGS. They won't know perhaps of a new initiative we have underway, which is called a seminars on leading thinkers. And we have two of those underway right now, one on Heidegger and another on Hegel. We'll be starting another pair in April. One of them is on Deleuze, and we presume the other will be on Lacan. So that's, and then our session begins this year. We're teaching on, all our teaching is happening on weekends this year. And that will begin in July and it will run all the way through November. So we urge people who are interested in EGS and the kind of thing you're doing to give a look at our program on our schedule on our website. And so, and then we will start again. Once the session is over in November, we'll be going back into these new seminars. And we'll be having events like these throughout the year, at least once a month. And so we have the online platform has given us some new possibilities, which we are seizing. We'll be meeting together in person as soon as possible. And I'm really looking forward to that day when we can come together, you and I. But in the meantime, we have a lot of wonderful things going on, which I wanted to mention here. Simon, there are questions that have been gathering for you in the Q&A box. So how about if I just let you go ahead and field these, because it's not overwhelming, I think, and you can choose how to respond to your.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Christopher, and yeah, really an honor to be here. I said that at the beginning, but good to say it while you're here as well.
Yeah, I'm terribly sorry for my absence, but anyway, here we are, and thank you so much for that beautiful talk.